Hey, so I figured I'd show you my current projects that we've got going on here for the 8.1. I'm working with my buddy Tom Demeuse. Tom makes adapters for adapting the GT500 superchargers to LS engines, LS applications. Maybe you've seen some of his stuff on Richard Holdner's show or Sloppy Mechanics. Either way, I got a hold of him and I told him about my project idea, and he was all for it. So as you can see in the background here, Tom makes the supercharger adapters, fits the intercoolers, and he also makes valve covers for LSs to look old school. So most recently, he has made an adapter to put on the Edelbrock 2650 universal head unit and adapt that to LSs. So he gets pretty creative. Him and I are working on a Hemi adapter too, to put the GT500 supercharger on a 5.7 Hemi that I have for my charger. And here's an image of intake manifold flanges that we took from the 8.1. So whoever wants to make their own sheet metal intake manifold will be able to pop those out and send them to you. So that's in development as well. Now you can see all this stuff up at the St. Ignace Car Show this year. Tom's going to be up there with his ride. I'll be up there with some wild stuff, and you can check it out. You notice how the RPM keeps falling and it's not a real strong idle. You can hear misfiring when you accelerate. This acceleration is slow and not smooth and kind of just poppy. Feel how choppy and how shaky it is. There's a misfire in. Very little power. Yeah, this thing is in pretty rough shape. So we'll break her apart and see what's going on inside. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and take the intake manifold off, check the manifold gaskets and see if they are cracked or show signs of leaking. We'll pull the valve covers off as well, check the valve springs and the push rods, see if there's any bent push rods or broken valve springs, rotate the engine over and see if any of the cam lobes are worn off, and pretty much replace a bunch of parts and go from there. We've got so many items that are replaced and upgraded, like the ignition and plugs and fuel system on this. Leads me to believe there's something going on internal of the internal engine component. So we'll pull her apart and see what we find. Alright, so if you haven't picked up one of these tools yet, one of these poppers, it saves like your knuckles and tons of time. So I'd recommend getting one. They work very easy getting these guys out of here. Super quick compared to like a screwdriver. So pick one of these up. Alright, so what we're looking for here is evidence of this gasket's failure, or it's maybe not catastrophic, but looking to see if there's oil on the inside of these rubber gasket lines, which would indicate oil is seeping past this gasket into the intake manifold. And I am seeing wetness and oil on the inside of that gasket. Of course my light doesn't work here. Hold on. There we go. So I am seeing moist or oil that's past this rubber gasket into the intake manifold area on a couple of these ports here. See some shininess here. The inside of this gasket is wet. You can see the bottom of these gaskets are crushed pretty good, and they are not pliable. Push my thumbnail into it. It is not squishy. I've read a couple places where the 8.1, these intake manifold gaskets will sometimes go, and then you'll see increased oil consumption due to the fact that your intake ports aren't sealed against the oil valley or the lifter valley, and so it will suck oil through these intake ports and reduce the amount of reduce your oil and increase oil consumption. So this is the top side. This would be sealing towards the intake manifold itself, and I am seeing some more deformation of the gasket and oil on the inside past the gasket point into where the intake port would be. Okay, well, we're going to change them anyway, but just trying to find the exact failure point. Alright, so we went ahead and got the oil cooler, air conditioning condenser out of the way, move the radiator so we can get access to this front accessory drive. Pull that thing off and get to the camshaft. Interesting part swap is the part number on this here alternator power steering pump bracket. It's the same as LS's as well, so if you need to put the bracket and accessories on the front of the 8.1 liter, it's the same part number, so should make it easier on your swap. We'll get this timing cover off the front and we'll see what we got. Okay, so you see I got the water crossover taken off. Also pulled the spark plugs out. Some of them were lean and some of them were tan, so I'll have to investigate a fuel distribution problem. Look at the injectors and the fuel pump, make sure that that's all installed correctly and doesn't have any obstructions. Gonna go ahead and spin the engine over to top dead center on number 1. That way when I start taking parts off, I know that I had everything lined up for TDC number 1. It'll just make it easier in the future. There we go. This is also a nice little tool to help find TDC number 1 too. Put your little camera in here in cylinder 1. Make sure your both valves are closed, and then advance the engine a little bit until you see the piston come all the way up and stop moving. And there you've got a visual representation of TDC number 1 as well. Alright, so you can see after I put the piston to top dead center, I took a Milwaukee marker here and I made a line that goes from this top dot on the top of the timing cover, or timing gear, and I followed it all the way down even to the tooth that intersects with the bottom divot in the bottom of the timing chain gear. So there's no question on how this orients in reference to that little cam stud as well. I like to do this when I'm doing cam changes on computer controlled vehicles, because sometimes you'll take the timing chain and gear and camshaft out and there's not a lot of witness marks. So if you set the number 1 piston to top dead center and then make yourself your own witness marks, you can put it back together quick instead of Googling what's the camshaft or timing gear looks like when you're trying to slam everything back together. So just a quick tip. Torx bit. T30. Okay, so you can pretty much see we've got the lifters out, the dog bones out, and there's the oil pump drive gear in the back. We'll go ahead and pull that out and we'll pull the cam out. There is a wear pattern on here, but I don't see any large signs of damage. So, yeah, not too bad. Alright, so to make it a little easier on me to get these locks out of the valves, I'm going to spray a little penetrant into these things. And then give them a whack with a rubber mallet. And that way when I run some compressed air into the cylinder and I compress the valve spring, the locks will come off quick and I can get them in and out of there and then get the new springs on. Alright, so let's talk about parts. For our valve springs, 911-16 from Comp Cams, we got our steel retainers, which are the 748-16s. Our lifters are from Summit, HT817s. The umbrella valve spring, or sorry, the valve seals are 504-16. Locks 612-16. The push rods are 715-1, so they're the 8 3/4 inch push rods on the intake side. The other push rods that haven't arrived yet are the CompCam 7181-1, 9.7 inches in length for the exhaust side. Okay, camshaft. It's the 605873-20. It is the thumper camshaft, 498 on the intake lift, 483 on the exhaust, 107-degree lobe separation, and at 50th lift, intake duration's 227 and exhaust is 241. So the only thing that really didn't go together easily was the bolt in the camshaft to the stock timing chain gear. And so we'll figure that one out and come on back. Okay, so the 8.1 liter has a different firing order than old school big block Chevrolets. And you notice from the camshaft I bought is an old school Chevrolet big block cam. So the old school big blocks would run, their firing order would be 18436572. The new big block, the 8 liter, is 18726543. So they effectively have swapped the 7.2 cylinder for the 4.3 cylinder. Now, how I'm going to get around that is I'm going to repin the wiring harness. You can see from these cylinder numbers, they have a color circled around them. Number 7 cylinder, to have the injector fire, uses a red wire. So I'm going to swap the green with white stripe over to the number 7 and effectively fire that cylinder injector off under the old school big block order. Now this image may help a little bit better here. So fuel injector number 3 is a pink and black wire that fires that fuel injector, and so I'm going to drag over the green and black injector firing wire, if you will, over into that spot. So I'm just going to reorder the firing order of the injectors and the coils just by repinning the wiring harness. So this is the way I plan to schedule my fuel injector swaps. I'm circling the fuel injector wire with the proposed new triggering wire. And then for the coils, here we have ignition coil 4. I'm going to swap the dark green and white with a red one. Ignition coil 2, I'll swap the blue one in. And then for the 7.3, green with white stripes on ignition coil 7, and then red with a white stripe for ignition coil 3. All right, so we'll go ahead and lube up the camshaft. We'll use the CompCam stuff and some Rev Lube with Molly inside it. Now to give these lobes a little extra protection, we're going to use this Molly Rev Lube as well on here. We also have a additive we're going to add to the oil by CompCams that'll help protect these lobes during startup. Okay, this will give us a little more leverage to bring that cam up in the back. Nice and easy. Okay, so now on the bottom of the lifters, since these are flat tappets, we'll go ahead and run this moly lube on here too. Okay, alright, here we go. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and do some push rod length checking here. I've got my adjustable push rod checker. There's just a little bit of pressure preload on the lifter itself. And the rocker arm is tightened down to its normal specs, so we'll go ahead and take a length of that intake push rod. Okay, so I have the stock intake push rod here, and then the new length with the flat tappet lifter. And when I take my micrometer, here I am, we're looking at about 0.51 distance in length increase when you go from the roller lifters to hydraulic flat tappet on the intake side. And I came up with some comp cams 8.750, so 8 3/4 inch push rods, the magnums. They were the closest I could get to the proper length. So okay, so my best measurement I can get at the final here is 0.576. So if my maths are correct, 0.512 longer push rod, 0.05, that takes me to 0.562, and we're at 0.576. So what was available and that could ship, this is going to have to work. So I also had to pick up some cam bolts here because the stockers are metric and needed the standard style. So we'll start putting things together and go from there. Alright, so I'm getting ready to compress the valve springs here, and I bought a valve spring compressor, but in my haste I bought the wrong one. So, and this does have two ends that you can use, but neither end is the right size for my rocker studs. So what we're going to do is make a tool. So I've got the stock rocker nut here, and what I'm going to do is cut my valve spring compressor about this length, and then go ahead and weld this nut to this shaft, and then grind off the shoulder bolt here, or the shoulder of the nut, and then pick up some new valve spring rocker thing nuts or whatever, rocker nuts, and buy a whole new set, and then make this tool so it's dedicated to the 8.1 liter. Okay, so here's our new and improved valve spring compressor tool. We welded the nut on there and ground her down so it will slide in and out of the tool. And then we also have the compressed air valve holder tool to keep the valves closed as we pull the valve springs off, change the valve seals, and all that good jazz. On number 5, when I was applying compressed air to number 5 cylinder, there was a lot of blow-by. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up the valve spring job here, but put my digital camera in the intake port and see if I don't have a drop valve seat or a bent valve or something. So I'll keep you updated on that, but let's finish her out and we'll go from there. Alright, here's a good close-up of the comp cam's spring retainer and locks, and then the stock spring retainer and locks. I'll go ahead and hit the valve springs with a rubber mallet to make sure they're all seated correctly, the locks are seated correctly, and then we'll pretty much go from there. Alright, so I scoped the number 5 cylinder on the intake port. That was the one that when I was changing valve springs and I compressed the cylinder, it seemed to have a lot of blow-by. Well, looking at the intake valve, there was a ton of blow-by, and it looks like carbon is being blown back up into the intake port past the valve. Like 25% of the valve was covered in black, and it looked as though it was coming back up through the cylinder. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and give a quick example on how much air is actually blowing by the intake valve on that number 5 cylinder. We'll compare it to the number 3 cylinder here. Alright, so you can hear a little bit of hissing from the blow-by here. This is a good cylinder. It's 90 psi getting pushed into the cylinder. You can see that it barely even, doesn't even move this little piece of towel. Okay, here's that same 90 psi on the number 5 cylinder. You can see it blowing it right by. So, it definitely lets us know that we've got a problem with at least our heads. So, let's go ahead and pull those things off and see what kind of damage we got to deal with. Alright, so one thing we're going to have to figure out is the stop timing chain here, or I'm sorry, timing gear has the on and off switch, if you will, for the computer. So the computer can take the cam sensor, read this and the crankshaft sensor, and determine whether what ignition coil to fire. So you pretty much need this. Now we used an old school camshaft here, and would change the bolts to imperial, but the spread of these bolts and this pin do not line up to the old style camshaft. So we'll have to figure that one out. Shouldn't be too difficult. Somebody's probably has a solution out there already, and if not, we'll just make one. I mean, if you know a good machinist, you can do about anything. Alright, so in the near future, I'm going to go ahead and do a DIY header kit. I picked up a kit from Hedman Hustler Headers, and we'll go ahead and hack and slash and put this thing together on our 8.1. So watch for that coming up too.